So the three actors, Benjamin Bratt, Jesse Borrego, and Damian Chapa. The director did something really smart. He made them go live in Boyle Heights in East LA for a month before filming so they could hear the gunshots at night. And they put, their one roommate was a reformed gang member. We're in San Quentin, the most notorious prison in the state of California. And so we walked into an environment that was real. We were not protected or guarded. We weren't separated from the population. The minute I walked out into the prison yard, I'd put on my glasses and I was magic all day long. And that was one of the ways that not only did I stay in character, but it also protected me because Magic was a guy you didn't mess with. There were many nights where I came home back to the hotel after a long day of filming and I cried.
Hello and welcome to Ego is Here. Today I'm joined once again by Victor Rivas Rivers, and this time we'll go deeper into the world of Blood In, Blood Out, a film that became a timeless classic and continues to resonate across generations. Hello, Victor. Hello again.
Hi, Ann. Hey, Ann, how are you? I'm good. I'm excited to go to speak on this topic because I think it covers so many different areas, not just in the acting world, but also it will touch life and cultures and language and art and so many things.
Yes. Victor, this film didn't just become popular, it became personal for people. Why do you think its impact grew over time instead of fading like most films do?
I think, I got to say, and for your audience out there, I've been in so many other films that they probably have seen me in. Mask of Zorro as Antonio Banderas' brother with Eddie Murphy in Distinguished Gentleman. I was the captain of the Amistad with Steven Spielberg and in his film, many films and TV roles. But I think why this film has this following, unlike any of the big blockbuster films that I've done, is because it speaks to truth. And it still speaks to truth. It's almost 30, I think 33, 34 years old. It came out in 1993. We filmed it in 1991. And that's because, with film, it always takes a certain amount of time to edit and then promote it. And so 93 is when it came out. And it was a film that did not have a big box office at all. And we'll talk more about why maybe the wrong studio had the film at the time, but the audience that it has today has just grown. It's 3 generations going on 4, and so I think that's probably why it speaks to truth. And yes, it because it's a Latino film, talking about the Chicano culture, the Mexican culture, but so yes, a lot of Latinos love this film. But I got to say, this film has a worldwide audience. I mean, I have fans that do my lines in Persian. I have fans in Australia. There's a huge lowrider community in Japan that they dress up like like the Chicano culture, and obviously are big fans of this film. So I think it hits because it speaks the truth about so many different things.
Has your interpretation of the film's meanings changed over the years as you've gained more distance and life experience?
Yes, I think it absolutely has, and it also has to do with the fan base. It's like I knew that there was a fan base out there, but I was really unaware of it until I started actually being asked to come do what they call here in the United States meet and greets. So, like I will go to an event on a weekend, and they're there primarily because they're there to meet Magic from Blood In, Blood Out, Victor Rivers, but Magic. Most people, they won't call me Magic. They won't call me Victor, that are fans of the film. So they always address me as Magic. And so that's when I really understood that there was a real following for this film. And then I got to tell you, there was the first time that I got somebody sent me a photograph of a tattoo of magic on their body was when I realized, okay, now it's now it's serious because as we know, if you put a tattoo on your body, it's for life. And
Yes.
so there has to be a strong, a strong meaning, and so I felt really. At first, I was a little shocked by it, but then I realized it was I was being given like a really great honor to actually, be on somebody's body,
Mm.
for the rest of their life. So,
Yes, yes. What does this film reveal about how identity is formed?
well, I mean, I think that I think as a society, regardless of where you live, um, and as a species, as a human species, we all want to belong to something. We all want to identify with something, whether it's a
Mm,
family, whether it's whether it's a school, whether it's if you happen to be an athlete, whether it's a program uh, within the way you're growing up, but also for a lot of kids out there, it's their neighborhood. And so this is within a city, within a we have a country, but within every city there are these little neighborhoods, these little
mhm,
pockets, and that's what we identify with. And so I think this is what this film represents, is that this is a story of three young boys, teenage boys growing up in East LA and Boyle Heights, in Los Angeles. Is a real community, and what that represents to them and how attached they become to that neighborhood, their culture, and in a sense of almost defending that neighborhood. And
mhm,
I think that we're all, in our world, I think, there are very, very few leaders. Most of us are followers. And so
mhm.
again, we want to belong to something, we want to follow something. And then it becomes about choices, which we can talk about as we go on. The choices we make in life can also impact not only us and our personal lives, but also back to the neighborhood. It actually impact what goes on in our communities.
Yes. Victor, you've shared that you were part of a gang when you were younger, right? Can you take me into that world for a moment and tell me your experience when you
Sure.
were young?
So I think that there, a lot of times there's a reason why, young boys and girls, or young people will join gangs. And so, as your audience has heard me speak before, I grew up in a real violent environment in my home, because of my father. And so when I first left his house, I first ran away from home. You would think that I'd want to escape that type of violence, but that's all I really knew.
Mm,
I was, basically, asked, to join this gang that was within my high school. And, so, part of the initiation is that you get beat up pretty badly. So in my particular situation, my initiation was I was hit with a baseball bat. They sawed off the one half of the bat, and then I had to bend over, and they would whack me on my backside, and every gang member got to hit me as soft or as hard as they wanted to. And then at the very end, they surround you and then you have to kind of fight them off. And that's how I got initiated into the gang. So, the only difference in my gang life based on my age and also where I lived, but certainly because of my age, there were less guns on the streets than there are in America today. Now, we have more guns on the streets than we have citizens in our country, which is, I mean, so we're
yeah, it's
talking about over
crazy.
350 million guns on the streets, at least. But we didn't have guns. So the term is, mano a mano, we fought with our hands,
Uh-huh.
and sometimes maybe a chain or a bat or something, but nobody got killed. And so it was a little bit different environment. So um, the title of our film is Blood In, Blood Out. And it's very similar to the Cosa Nostra, to the
Mhm.
mafia in this country, or in other parts of the world.
Yes.
Blood in means in order to get into the gang, you have to kill somebody. and the only way out of the gang is you die as a soldier, or if you
Mhm.
try to leave the gang, they kill you. So that was a little bit different in my era because um, I was able to leave my gang because because there were no guns involved. So I basically um, I had another outlet for not only my anger, my rage, all the things that had happened to me as a kid, but also because I was a good athlete. I had that outlet, but
Mhm.
athletics was going to give me a possible different opportunity in life, and it did. It ended up paying for my college education, so I was able to become educated. And so, and again, we'll go back to this to blood and blood out as we talk about choices. But that's I had a different choice that I could make. But my gang life was brief, but violent. And yet I wanted to belong to something. It was a brotherhood. It's like, I had this family that was going
Mhm.
to, would hang out with me and protect me and all these things. And yet, you would think I would have wanted to run from that because I grew up in such violence. But
Yeah.
that's all I knew at that time. And so I was actually slowly being introduced to other choices, other people who kind of surrounded me and gave me a different message. But that was my gang life back then, and and it kind of followed me through high school, even though I had left the gang. Once I made a reputation of the gang, sometimes other like street gangs would kind of show up at different events that I was at, and I'd have to sort of get myself out of the situation. But that that was my personal experience, but I also know why I joined, and it was because I wanted to belong to something that maybe would protect me. And
Yeah.
yet, I got beat up pretty badly to get into the gang. But that was, and remember, I was at 15 years old, I was already 6'2" and over 200 pounds. So I was a boy in a man's body. So,
Yes. Yes. How much of your experience as a young gang member shaped the way you approached Magic Mike?
so Magic Mike was, very interesting because we'll talk about how Magic Mike sort of, but in the original script of Blood and Blood Out,
Hmm.
Magic Mike was a member of, like, for the fans out there, that I'm a member of La Onda, and Onda means the wave. So it was like this brown wave that was coming, at that particular time,
Hmm.
because our film starts in the 70s. Is when especially in prison, it was the beginning of where the brown population in prison started to become bigger and bigger. So
Hmm.
they created these gangs within the prison system. We made up Onda is just a fictitious name. We're not associated with any real gang that's currently in the world out there. So, but what it turns out, the magic was actually a very small role in Onda in the script, and so I was offered a different role in the film in Onda, which I'm not gonna say which role it was,
Hmm.
but I was offered that role, and the very next day, the director Taylor Hackford, who directed Ray, An Officer and a Gentleman, and many other films, and the writer Jimmy Santiago Baca, who is an award-winning Chicano poet who taught himself to read and write in prison in New Mexico, asked me to meet with them in the office. And I came in and they said, the other role is yours if you want it, but we want to talk to you about magic. And he says, the more we think of you and we think of this character, we want to make magic a bigger part of this movie. And we want you to play him. And so I had to take a leap of faith because, in the script, he wasn't in there. I mean, I was in there, but I was always in the background with Onda, just
Hmm.
Magic was in the background. And my character's full name is Magic Mike. So the Magic Mike films that came out, the dancing, with there's with Chatham, Chatham Tatum, who was a stripper.
Yeah.
That's not my guy, but I always say I'm the original Magic Mike. But I
Right.
didn't dance. I didn't dance. So we created, with the writer and myself, and then the director, but mainly the writer and myself, kind of created what magic would be, and I was able to bring in sort of my own experiences. But I will tell you, it wasn't until I got to San Quentin. So when the fans out there, most of the fans know this, but for those that don't, when they say San Quentin prison, we're in San Quentin. and that's at that particular time in the state of California. It was the most notorious prison in the state of California. And so we walked into an environment that was real. We were not protected or guarded. We weren't separated from the population. They were, many of them were in the film with us. So when, once your audience figures out who the actual actors are in the movie, everybody else you see are the real convicts doing time. So when I walked around San Quentin, I I went there, but for the grace of God, it could have very well have been I could have been magic in real life, and had I followed the same path I was following as a young man.
So, what surprised you the most about the people you met there in San Quentin?
Well, I would say one of the things that became real clear to me whenever I talked to the act, because obviously it's a male prison population.
Mhm.
Um, when I talked to the men in San Quentin, when I had actual conversations with them, and as your audience knows from our last time
Episode.
together, is that I'm a national spokesperson
Mhm.
for against domestic violence, violence against women and child abuse and whatever. And what I discovered is that every single guy that I spoke to in San Quentin had family violence in his background. So it just
Mhm.
shows you that there's a reason why people, we're not born bad or violent. We have to learn that behavior somewhere. And most of the time we're learning those in our homes and in our relationships. Then we take it out to the streets and onto our school campuses and into our world. And so that's what I was discovering with these men, and a lot of them at that time in San Quentin. I'm not saying that it hasn't changed a little bit, but at that time in San Quentin, from my observation, there was no rehabilitation in prison to speak of. These guys weren't going to get better because they were in prison doing their time. In many ways, they might become more hardened, or they learn other sort of criminal skills that they didn't come in with. And
Mm.
so the environment can make you can actually harden you. And so that's why I always say, let's give our young boys and our young men and our young girls, and girls, some other opportunities before they get there, because once they get into that kind of an environment, it's gonna be tough.
Yes.
So.
Yes. So that experience changed your understanding of how violence develops in someone, right?
Right, and it also made me think about incarceration differently, about being in prison differently, and that's why when I speak nationally and sometimes even internationally on this issue, I always bring up the fact that I use the example of, and I'm gonna give you an example. So my son went to Harvard. That's
Mhm.
where he went to college. So Harvard is, if you paid full tuition at Harvard, it's around 65 to 75 $70,000 a year to go to Harvard. To incarcerate a male in our prison system is around 60,000, and it can be up as high as 65,000. And if you're incarcerating, like if it's a juvenile and they're in the juvenile prison system, it's about $100,000 because they spend money on counseling and whatever. So
Mhm.
so if we have the money as in our country, in the United States, to incarcerate our population, and but we have that money, but we don't have the money to invest in our schools and giving kids other opportunities. That's why I say it's absolutely this is how, if we really want to sort of address these issues, we have to make an investment, not only as like as administrations or like government officials, but also as a community, as a society. We need to make these investments because we ultimately seem to have billions and billions of dollars in the United States to build more and more state of the art prisons to put our population in it. And primarily that population is brown and black, meaning Latino
Mhm.
and black, or African American. So, again, that's part of my journey, and why I always say, let's make the investment somewhere else.
Yes, exactly. Victor, why do you think so many people see themselves in this film, even if they've never lived that kind of life or never had those experiences?
That's a great question because there's a lot of people that have misinterpreted this film, including the studio that did the film. Because the studio was, when you watch the film, it'll say Hollywood Pictures at the beginning of the film,
Hmm.
and it turns out that I just so happened to have done 3 films for Hollywood Pictures. I did a film called One Good Cop with Michael Keaton, who
Hmm.
played Batman. He's the original Batman.
Yes.
And then I did a Blood and Blood Out, and then I did a movie, The Distinguished Gentleman, with Eddie Murphy. They were all Hollywood picture films. My checks came from Disney, so that
Oh.
means the ultimate studio is Disney.
Hmm.
And so when we turn in this film, and a lot of people that initially like watch this film or think they're trying to understand this film, they call it a gang film.
Hmm.
And the reality, it's so much more than, there is a gang element to the film, but this is a story that involves family, it involves culture, and it's a story of choices and the choices we make in
Exactly.
life. And so they're using the story of these 3 young boys that happen to be in a street gang in East Los Angeles, East LA, and or as they would say here, East Los. And then the choices they make because of what happens on this one pivotal moment in their gang life where somebody gets killed.
Hmm.
And so each lead actor in the film, the young boy representing in the film that's going to become a man now, is going to go into his adulthood, has to do different choices. One goes into the military out of necessity. Is one way he doesn't have to do prison time,
Hmm.
so he goes to the military and he ends up becoming a police officer. And then there's the one who's the artist, and then he's in this dark place for a lot of the film, and it deals with addiction and opioid use and whatever. And then there's the one young man who ends up in the prison system in California,
Hmm.
and how that changes his life. And so I think that we all have those stories, sometimes certainly within our communities, but sometimes within our own families. We have
Hmm.
those stories. And so I think that this is why it's so relevant. I can't tell you how many people have come up to me, whether women or men, and said, "Oh my God, you look just like my father, who spent most of my life, he was in prison," or "You look like my uncle, who also looked a lot like Magic, was in prison." So people really related to different parts of the film, but even to those that were incarcerated. A lot of families that have come up to me over the years have said that they had a relative that kind of resembled what I was resembling in the film.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so Magic is, he probably has his own background story and whatever, but Magic was obviously hardened by the prison system, and yet he still tries. He tries to be a loyal soldier. He's there's
Yes.
a point where he feels maybe a little bit like a Judas because of something that happens in the film with my character. But I think that's why the communities have related to this film, but especially the Latino communities, because we all grow up, and especially if we're growing up in a certain part of the city, there's this element that's there too, and that is that gang element that's there, and how it might impact not only the individual families, but the community as a whole. So
Yes.
on a micro, but also on a macro level.
Of
So
course.
yeah.
Victor, what part of Magic Mike do you understand more deeply today than when you played him?
I think really clearly that like the part that seemed to come kind of naturally to me was that Magic there, like Magic was, the title of my character in the film is I was the warlord of
Hmm.
La Onda. I was the guy when you went to war. I was the guy that would lead the soldiers in.
Hmm.
So there was that part of it I understood really well. But I also thought that as I've gotten older, now that I know and about, sort of my own childhood, everything that I grew up with, is that that part of that came so easy to me because I understood it, and I understood, um, even, it gave me a better understanding probably of even my own father, like the things that he might have been struggling with, whether, mental illness or his own experiences as a child or whatever, that, there's a reason we act and we do the things that we do. But what made it really clear to me now that I'm older is that I feel really blessed, that I was given so many other opportunities, because in my real story and the
Mm.
Victor story, not the magic story, I was able to break the cycle of violence. I was able to reclaim my life and the
Yes.
person I was supposed to be. And that's why a lot of the people that are incarcerated, they don't get that opportunity. And by the time they get out, they have a big sign over their head that says ex-convict. And it makes it really, even though they might have changed their whole way of thinking, their life, they might have, some of them find religion, whatever it takes to break that mold, that cycle.
Hmm. Hmm.
They're still coming out, and they have this big stamp over their head that follows them for the rest of their life.
Yeah, there's
And
a
and
stigma.
some,
Yes.
yeah, and there's a stigma to
Yeah.
it, so they might not be able to get away from it. So.
Mm. And I think that that hasn't changed over the years. What do you
mm.
think? There's still
No,
that.
yeah, and absolutely. So this is the interesting story about San Quentin that people don't know, is that, like I said, in '91 when we were there, so in the '90s, it was considered the most notorious prison in the state of California, meaning the scariest. It had some of the toughest guys. They had some very famous people in death row. Charles Manson was there for a while. Then they moved into a different prison. So that's just an example of the different people that were in San Quentin at different times. But but, but today it's considered the most rehabilitative prison in the state of California. So if you go to
Oh.
prison, and I don't know if like if that was a direct effect from Blood and Blood Out or whatever, but there's a lot of programs now that go into San Quentin, and people that don't, sort of dedicate their time to helping, the inmates find different skill sets. And a lot of the skill sets that they're being taught are entrepreneurial, meaning that because they're not going to get hired out there the way they want to, and with the
Hmm.
kind of money that, so they're creating their own businesses, whether it's a rug, carpet cleaning company, or whether
Yes.
it's this or that. So they're actually learning business skills and different ways to sort of, create their own businesses, so that not only they can provide for their own families, but then they can hire other people coming out of prison.
Mm.
And I'll give you a great example of one of the actors in the film is, a lot of your audience will probably know him. His name is Danny Trejo, and Danny is, he's
Yes.
kind of, long hair. He's got the big tattoo of the the Mexican girl on his chest, and you've seen him. He's Machete, and he's been in all these different films, and he has a real hard look. Well, Danny Trejo actually did some of his time in San Quentin prison. So he's the real thing, and he has come out, and he has totally changed his life. Now he's been, clean and sober for like over 50 years, so he does a lot of counseling on that.
Mhm.
But Danny also has created all these businesses, like, Trejo's Tacos, and he's got a donuts in Hollywood, and some of his businesses are expanding nationally. And Danny, during COVID, fed the community, and so he's a real inspiration, not only to myself, but to those that are coming out of prison. He stands as a living example of somebody who's actually been able to transform himself. So I really, I'm really, you know, uh, proud of the work that he's done. And as it turns out, just coincidentally, my book, A Private Family Matter,
Mhm.
is the publishers are Simon and Schuster, and Danny has a book that just came out last year that's called Trail. And he has the exact same publishers, so it's just kind of just a small
Amazing.
world. I mean,
Amazing.
that it
Yes.
would happen that
Yes.
way. But Danny is a living example of, that, he was able to sort of rehabilitate his life and change, because he was a hardened, you know,
Mhm.
gang member and convict, and he was able to change his life, and through acting, he gave him these other opportunities, and And so, and Danny, by the way, Danny has the one thing, and I think it's a real brilliant thing that Danny does is so Danny is because of the way he looks, Danny almost always plays bad guys.
Yes.
And he has one rule when he takes on a role as a bad guy. They have to kill him at the end
Really?
because to let people know that crime doesn't pay. So that's something he does, like, and it's kind of like, sort of a thing that is part of his, contract or whatever, is that they have to, kill him
Beautiful.
off at the end. Because I've played a lot of bad guys, so I would, like I've died in so many different ways in movies. So, and my mom, when I would get when she was, my mom passed away many years ago, but at 84, she lived a full life. But my mom, when I would get a new role, my mom would say in Spanish, y te van a matar. She goes, are they going to kill you? And I go, yeah. And so just letting her know, because she'd have to watch her son being killed in all these different movies. So, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. What part of the film do you understand differently today than when you did back then? Is there any part of the film?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think the I think I really understand the sort of the cultural aspects
Hmm.
of and the beauty of the film, because like, remember, so by birth I'm Cuban, so I'm a
Yep.
naturalized American citizen, but I was born in Cuba, so I'm playing a Chicano. I'm playing a sort of a like West Coast, it's a very specific term that is more California than it is anywhere else, because Texas is like Tex-Mex, it's this is all these different things,
Hmm.
but um so in order for me to portray magic, in the most authentic way, I had to sort of, invest myself in, sort of, and just really kind of jump into the culture. And so I learned so much, about that while I was shooting. But as time has gone on, and all of the different, opportunities that I've had to meet with the fan base out there, um, is that, how much this film really means to people. I mean, people sometimes will come up, at my event, and other, because I've done some events with some of the other actors. Like, we had a coffee table book that came out a couple of years ago, so they were able to bring us all back together. Uh, in the and do a big event and a book signing and whatever. And so people will sometimes walk up crying
Mm.
because we honored that their culture and their way of living. And so so I think what it really helped me is to really understand, um um and to be, more invested in culture. So,
Mhm.
I became very Americanized here as a young immigrant to this country,
Yes.
and eventually, it's like I wasn't surrounded by the Cuban culture until I got to high school. That's when my dad, some people know from my story, I got kidnapped from Los Angeles to Miami with my siblings, and so that's when I was finally thrust into my own culture, the Cuban culture. And I was so Americanized that I almost fought it at the beginning. And then now, through time, I'm very invested in my own culture. And, I'm proud to be a Cuban and all that. But I'm also, the thing that makes me, the proudest, as far as, like, as an actor, a lot of people will ask me the question, which, I'm sure you're gonna get you were gonna ask me, so I'll answer right now. People will say, "What is your most memorable, like, film role?" Like, as far as the work and everything. And so, as an actor, the one thing we wanna do is we wanna be fully immersed in the character.
Yes.
And so I'll use the example of a film that was out last year. It's one of the most powerful films I've seen in decades, maybe in my life, called Hamnet, which is
Hmm.
the story of, the sort of the creation of Hamlet, the Shakespeare play, and how it came to be and all that. And so when you see those actors playing those roles and they're fully immersed, when you look at Shakespeare, because remember, he's a writer, and the way he's writing back then was with a quill and like ink, and his fingers are filthy and they're dirty, or they got, there's none of that. Well, he's acting. We want to make sure he has pretty hands, and so the actors are fully immersed. that's what I got. I was suddenly immersed. We were not pretending we were in a prison, because that's usually what happens in Hollywood. You go to an empty prison that's used to be a
Mhm, mhm.
prison, and then you fill it up with characters and people that
Yes.
look like, or they actually did time, or gang members. Our film, we were, just for your audience, so San Quentin, when it was originally built, it was built for 2,500 inmates.
Mhm.
When we were there in 93 in 91, there was 5,500 inmates. So there was no room for, people ask me, did you stay overnight? And I said, no, we didn't. One, because there was no room for us. But, so we slept in a hotel down the road, but the director was really smart. He didn't put us in, typical fancy Hollywood hotel. We were in a kind of very, very standard hotel
Mm.
that had a little pool, and, our rooms were nothing special, so that we didn't, go from, like from
Yes.
the to prison to opulence to,
Mhm,
like,
mhm.
like we had no, like, room service. We didn't have any of that. So you had to go walk down to the McDonald's if you wanted something to eat, or the local restaurant or whatever. So, um, but, um, but for me, that's why when I talk about, being fully immersed, I've had great experiences as an actor playing this role and that role, and you know, uh, but this was the one role where I would walk out from the trailer. The trailer was, the makeup trailers were right in the middle of the prison yard, and so the trailers were, as your audience can see, I have no tattoos, but I'm covered in tattoos in the movie.
Yes.
And so I would walk out. The minute I walked out into the prison yard, I'd put on my glasses, my sunglasses,
Mhm.
and I was magic all day long. So the inmates, none of them knew no one called me Victor. Nobody knew my real name. I was magic. And that was one of the ways that not only did I stay in character, but it also protected me, because magic was a guy you didn't mess with. And so
Yes.
I created that character, and I carried with him all day. And so I respected the other inmates all around us, but they also respected me, because I gave off that because I was locked into the character. Um, Sometimes, by choice, but
Mhm.
also I was also locked into that character because of my environment. I felt like it was the one way I could stay safe in what could have been a very dangerous environment. And there were things that happened while we were in prison that we were exposed to, and I remember we didn't have, like, bodyguards. There were prison guards just like they are every day. So there were things that
Would
we
you like
saw.
to share any of these incidents?
We were working in the prison yard, one day with, doing a shot,
Mhm.
and something went down not close to us, but, we could heard the commotion. Then everybody had to hit the ground, because, you hear the sirens and you see all the guards coming in, and somebody had been stabbed, shanked, they call it, and he died. And so, we were in the prison yard where that happened, and we had to go. We're dressed exactly like the convicts. We don't have, like, little vests that we wear, that, in between scenes, to say
Yes.
actor. So
Yes.
it's like we kind of, we look like them. So, very easily, if something big had broken out, we'd have been right in the middle of it. And, we saw, there was a couple times where we saw, like, people that had tried to take their own lives, be like, like, brought right through the middle of the set on a stretcher, because, they tried to cut their wrists or whatever. So there were things that we saw and we heard. And
Mhm.
that's the one thing, that I never got over, was the volume in prison is so loud. There's just, you're in these cell blocks where there's like 3 or 4 tiers,
Mhm.
and it's just loud, and there's people yelling and screaming the whole time, like, you would hear somebody yelling, "I want my meds, I want my meds." They want their
Yes.
medication because they're having an episode. Um, but, you could hear stuff. And if, probably the most unique sound that I've never experienced anywhere else, is if something's going down, like there's a situation on one of the cell blocks, one of the tiers, or, maybe there's a fight going on or whatever. Um, you suddenly hear, because all the guards are carrying these big, like, they have these big rings on their
Mhm.
belts that
Mhm.
are full of keys, and you hear just keys coming from everywhere.
Cookies.
Like, and it's like the first time that happened, we all kind of froze because we didn't know. And you could see the guards kind of flying by. And remember, none of the guards, the only guards that have guns are the ones that are in the rifle towers up
Mm-hmm.
top.
Mm-hmm.
So the ones on the ground don't have guns, and the reason why is because they're outnumbered. So that you could get, those guns could be taken away
Of
very
course.
quickly by the prisoners.
Yes.
So so that was for me, that full immersion into as an actor
Mm-hmm.
that I've never experienced, anything quite like it. I've had other great experiences where, like I was the captain of the Amistad, and there's the whole opening scene in the movie because they're going to kill me immediately because I'm the captain of, they kill the whole crew on the Amistad. It's the story of the slave ship that landed on American soil, and Spielberg directed it, and we shot that whole scene with all of this, like it was lightning, and there was a storm and waves coming over and all that, and we were in a airplane hangar that they created this whole thing, and we
Mm-hmm.
were on hydraulics, so the boat was doing, and it took me 30 seconds, and I was the captain,
Yes.
ship, I was, steering the ship through this big storm and the waves, and it was all inside.
Mm.
And so, that was like another moment to get lost, but not like Blood and Blood Out. And I think that was the same for all the actors, the kids, your audience, that especially those that are fans of the film. So the three actors that played, that played Cruz, Miklo, and Paco. Where the story kind of revolves around the three of them:
Yes.
Benjamin Bratt, Jesse Borrego, and Damian Chapa are the three actors. The director did something really smart because he's that's why the film is still so strong today. Is he made them go live in Boyle Heights in East LA for a month before filming, and they put, their one roommate was a reformed gang member who's now, like doing lots of great stuff in the community, but he had the respect of the other gang members. But they made them move into East LA so they could hear the gunshots at night. They could so they put him in the
Wow.
in the hood for a month, and they lived in an apartment for a month before filming so that they could really feel, so they weren't just brought into the neighborhood every day like we in San Quentin. Remember, we were there about 5 weeks. We were there every day from 7 a.m. in the morning, and we usually left around 6 or 7 a.m., 7 p.m. at night.
Mm-hmm.
And we were there in the summer, so 7 p.m. was before it became dark and whatever. So we all had to come in together, and we all had to leave together. So even if you weren't filming till the afternoon, it didn't matter,
Mm.
because of security reasons. We all had to be brought in together,
Yes.
and our car searched and everything else. And then we all had to leave together, car searched, and then to the hotel, and then back the next day. And we did that for 5 weeks. So we were like in prison all day, and we got released at night. So, that was our
Amazing.
thing. So yeah.
Victor, at what point did you realize that this film had become something bigger than expected?
Okay, great story. So this involves my son now is 32, but this is right after he was. So the film had been out for, I want to say, about maybe a year and a half or so, because he was born in '94, so the film came out in '93.
Mm-hmm.
And I lived, living in a beach community in Los Angeles, and I was out. He was in the stroller, and I was out, walking, towards the it's called the Strand. It's like the sidewalk where you can walk, and the
Mm-hmm.
ocean's on your right or left, and you walk or
Yes.
whatever. And I'm walking down, and there's this tall, like maybe 6'3", redheaded guy, but he's dressed. He's dressed in, I was able to, because of the movie, I was able to distinguish between sort of the people that want to look, like, they dress in gang attire, and
Mm-hmm.
the real guys. And this guy was a real guy. I could feel it, and he walked by me, and freckle face, red hair, freckle face, light eyes. And, and he kind of turned and he looked at me, and then he walked away for a minute, and then he came back, and he walked up to me, and with a really thick, Chicano accent, he asked me, he goes, "Hey, he goes, excuse me, but I don't want to disrespect you or anything, but he goes, "Are you Magic from Blood and Blood Out?" And I go, "Yeah." And then he said, he said to me, he goes, "Oh, I don't want to disrespect you, but can I do something for you?" And I go, "Okay." And he said, so he turned around and he like prepared himself. Then he turned around and then he did some of like the opening, the moment where you see me in the film where I turn around and I say, "Hey, you're the sucker that does the spider." And he did the whole thing. And then he did the little growl at the end, whatever, at the end. And then he said to me, and I was like, wow, that's amazing. He knew all my lines. And I got my little baby, like in the stroller. And then he said to me, he goes, I aspire to be like you. And I go, oh, you want to be an actor? He goes, no, man, I want to go to La Pinta. La Pinta means I want to go to prison. And
Oh.
he wanted to get, he wants to get, he wants to get, like his reputation, like, and I'm thinking to myself, okay, wrong message, whatever. So that was my first encounter. And then I walked away with my son. And I walked down, I usually did like 2 miles, and then I turned around and I was coming back because, that's where he saw me come in from. And I was coming back. And as I'm walking back, I look up at the pier, because that's where I came in at, right by the pier. And
Mhm.
I look up and there he is. And now there's 20 real gang members waiting for me because they want to
Wow.
meet me. And that's when I realized that Victor and my character, I had carte blanche. That there was a level of respect, and they weren't there to hurt me. They wanted to meet me,
To meet
and
you.
that was my first encounter. Like, and then I went, wow. So that and again, like I said, the message from the kid, he wanted to get his reputation in prison like magic. I was like, no, no. But I didn't argue with him because I had my little child with me or
Of
whatever.
course.
But that scene of like walking back and seeing like the real kind of gang members all hanging out, like kind of just waiting on me, and I was like, okay. So that was my first experience, and then from there it just again it's grown that I'm I was 36 years old when I shot Blood and Blood Out, and and I'm still, there's still this fascination with wanting to meet the actors from the film because it represents a part of their own stories, their
Mm.
own childhoods, their own familial things that happen within their families, and so that's why I think it always amazes me when I hear people, talk about this film and but also when, we have fans, I did a car show in Las Vegas, lowrider car show. That's the lowriders are the cars that, that can drop down really low and
Mhm.
they bounce and very, very cultural. And there was a guy who came from Australia, not Latino, guy who came from Australia, and he came to the car show dressed like me. Like in the movie. So he had on all the denim, like, like a convict. And he had all these tattoos and he did his hair and his mustache like my character. And I was like, wow. And this is like last year. So this is like,
Oh.
just recently, but it's also again, the artwork, the murals, that I see constantly,
Mm.
not only in our country, but around, different parts of the world. I've seen like murals that show up like in different parts of Mexico, or I've seen product lines like hair products
Mhm.
from, that are sort of Latino and that's the company origin. And I'll be on the product. The image of Magic is, Magic had all the, he had the nice hair
Yes.
in
Yeah.
the film. And so like, it's some kind of hair product that you use, but it has my image on it. I'm going, like, I guess I should have maybe, like copyrighted it, but
Yes,
or whatever. But it doesn't
definitely.
really. It has nothing to do with that. It has more to do with the fact that there really is a sense of that the film and the character is being honored. So that to me is, as an actor, we try to create, authentic characters.
Mhm.
And the fact is, when some of my fans will meet me at like some of the different events, two things, they'll go, wow, you have no tattoos. And two, you're not Mexican, and I say, yeah, that's my job as an actor. It's
Mm.
like I needed to represent you and your culture in the right way. So I had to do my homework and to create, that, somebody that you thought was authentic. And I'll tell you who the best compliments that I got was when I was in San Quentin, because the guy that did all my tattoos, and so those tattoos would stay on my body for about 2 days, 2.5
Mhm.
days. They'd start to, so I could shower. I couldn't go like this in the shower. I could go like this in the
Yes.
shower or whatever,
Yes.
but I just couldn't rub. But they would stay on my body, and then they might fix it up a little bit. But if they had to start from scratch, if I was in a scene where I was shirtless, like there's I have a big jaguar on my back that a lot of people don't see. They see it once in the movie, but I'm covered in tattoos. If they were starting from the beginning to end, with my tattoos, this is about 3 hours in the chair where I was. And so the guy that did my tattoos he's world famous for his tattoos. His name is Freddie Negretti, and Freddie he's a former convict. So he's known for his prison style tattoos. And
Wow.
so when I was walking through San Quentin, a lot of the convicts, when and they felt like they could talk to me, they would, I can't tell you how many would ask me where'd you do your time, because they thought I was like
Mhm,
an
mhm.
actor who had become, a convict who had become an actor.
Yes.
And so they thought my tattoos were real, that, the way I was marked up was so authentic that they believed that that I had actually done time somewhere. So, and I was, like, "Oh, yeah, I did time in Hollywood." Don't so I didn't want to, make a joke out of it, so I didn't say anything, or, whatever. And I just kinda kept it secret, like, that was my secret.
Yeah.
But, to me, that was probably the best sort of, um, knowing that, and I'll use an example for the fan base that
Mhm.
might be out there. So if we were doing a scene in the movie, and sometimes I would turn around, like, after I finished doing something that, and I wasn't looking for approval, but I would just kind of turn around. And, a lot of the guys had their, dark, so I don't have my dark glasses on, but they would have their dark glasses on. They would just lower their glasses like this and look at me, and they would just do this. They would go, they
Mm.
just give me like a slight little head nod, and I went, "Okay." I didn't disrespect them, because,
Mhm.
that's a big part
Yes.
of this, is that, there's a level of respect that you have to gain from them, and they don't want you to make their life or their journeys into a cartoon. And
Mhm.
I think that's why this film, I think, is still resonating, 33, 34 years later, is because, remember, the writer of the film is, he's an award-winning Chicano poet, Jimmy Santiago Baca. And again, he went into prison as a young man, illiterate. He couldn't read or write, and he taught himself how to do it in prison. And so now he's this, so the voice, especially the character Crucito, Cruz the artist,
Mhm.
at the end of the film, when he's got Paco and they're looking at that mural,
Yes.
and you hear that beautiful poetry that he's spouting. That's Jimmy's voice inside of Cruz. And the artist that Crucito is, his artwork, the guy the artist in the
Mhm.
movie, whose his real artwork is Adan Hernandez, who passed away a couple of years ago. But Adan Hernandez is a renowned Chicano, or, Mexican artist from San Antonio, Texas. And so, that's why we had some really authentic people, with us, and including Danny Trejo, who's, in
Yes.
San Quentin. you know,
Yes.
he wasn't our guide in San Quentin, but I can tell you, when we got off the bus the very first day, when we got off our, the bus that would bring us in every day, the very first time he walked off the bus, because Danny looks like Danny. You can't, he looks like no one else. There were some of the lifers, you could hear him yelling, "Hey, Danny!" Like he was back, you know, and you got a lot of people don't know this, but Danny was the middleweight boxing champion of San Quentin. So,
Oh.
he was known, so, in many ways, Danny was also, and not only an inspiration for us, but also, you know, he had lived the life, and so he was somebody that we could gain knowledge from just by watching him. Just
Yes.
watching how he moved and within that system. So yeah.
So, what are some backstage stories from the filming that really stayed with you over the years?
Well, so this is the and I told this story. The director did not, you know, because he was so busy directing and doing. So this is the very last day of filming
Hmm.
in San Quentin. And remember, we can't leave. Like when I'm done, usually, they take you back to your trailer, and then you go to your car, or a car picks you
Yes.
up and takes you back to the hotel, or whatever, if you're filming on location or whatever. And so this was the last day, and we were filming. This was like a 15-hour day, and I stopped filming at about the 12th hour. I finished my last scene, and we were shooting in a cell block. So the cell block, it has 4 tiers, like 1, 2, 3, 4, and
Hmm.
then the different groups sometimes are on. They're almost segregated on different tiers. So they put me, I was, off camera, so you couldn't see me on the camera, but they were
Hmm.
still shooting something else. And I was sitting in a director's chair, those chairs you
Yes.
always see on film sets. So I'm sitting in a director's chair, and I'm sitting there, and all of a sudden I felt something hit the top of my head, like something like
Yes.
wet hit my top of my head. And I went like that. And I looked at my hand, and somebody had spit on me, like a really nasty spit, like on the top of my head. And I looked up, and on the 3rd tier was one of the Aryan Brotherhoods, one of the white guys, the white gang guys, one of the real convicts. And he was just kind of like laughing like that. And I just lost it. And I jumped out of my chair, and I started running up like I got up to like the 2nd tier, when I got intercepted by like 5 guards, and they like pulled me out, and they took me outside the cell block, and they were like, "Well, what are you thinking? Whatever." And I'm like, I'm so lost
Mm.
in character. It's the last day, and a man just spit on me. So as a man to man,
Yes.
you don't spit on another man. But I'm magic, and they pulled me, they pushed me up against the wall. I go, "What the hell are you thinking?" Or whatever. And I go, "That puto disrespected me, man. Nobody's gonna spit on me." And I was like locked in the character,
Mm.
and so they knew not to bring me back inside. So they took me to like a little office, and I had a timeout. I had to go sit in like a little office. So that was my last day, and that was that's when I walked away from that, and thinking to myself, what the hell was I thinking? Because had I gone up maybe one more flight, I might have been killed.
Yes.
Because
Yes.
I mean, I was like, as big and as tough as I am. I have my own
Mm.
background,
Yes.
but I'm in their world. I'm pretending to be in their world, and I'm
Mm.
not. So anyway, so I told that story when we did the big book signing for the coffee table book I was telling you about. Um, I told that story on stage, and Taylor was like, because he was so locked in, he didn't even see it. Like it's like, but they escorted me out, and then when they finished, they brought me back, and I got on the bus and I left. But that was the last day that we were there. But again, and then the other thing for the fans is, as I said earlier, the prison was built for 2,500 inmates. They had 5,500 inmates. So that the very first scene you see in the movie, when you see us, is when they bring when the it's shot in the cafeteria, and
Mhm.
eventually Miklo will make his way over to my table with Popeye, the character, and and but that scene, that was the first scene that we shot in San Quentin. They have to do like 3 or 4 different lunch or dinner servings, because they don't have enough room in the cafeteria. So they brought in 1,000 inmates, and then we had the inmates they were gonna work with us and be kinda with us all the time to
Mhm.
control their others. And that's why we had some of the leaders of the different gangs in our little population of the actors. And And there was no introduction. They just brought them in and we started shooting. There was like, oh, we want to introduce Victor's going to play this guy and this guy's going to be this guy. No, it was just like boom. And so it was, a baptism by fire, and the noise level was really loud. And remember, we're now inside we're in the cafeteria, and everybody, they don't have silverware like, but they have things that they could hurt you
Yeah,
with,
of course.
and they all have them. So there was that, that was the very first, that was the very last day, and the very first day was that first scene that you see in the cafeteria. That was shot, and that was our introduction to everything, the noise level, all that kind of intense energy. I'm telling you, it's you feel it. You can feel the energy all around you. And so that was my introduction, and that was my exit. I got put in a timeout because I was so lost in character. So there's a picture that I think that you might want to post. There's a black and white picture of me sitting at a table, and that's in San Quentin. That's the last week. That's week 5, and you can see in my eyes that I'm completely a different person. That I'm that character, and I look dark, and I look like somebody you don't want to mess with. That's that's on the very last week of filming. I was already by then, it took, my ex-wife said it took me about a month to where she could see me all the time, because like it took like a little by little I was
Yes.
dropping the character because I lived it for so long and in that environment. So
It was
and
very
I'll be
intense.
honest, yeah, and so and I'll share this with your audience, is that there were many nights where I came home, back to the hotel after a long day of filming, and I cried because of the inhumanity that I saw every day, and just, and maybe just the loss of life, not the physical loss of life, but just the loss of life, of the spirit of, what these guys and were living through. And so it really impacted me. So it took me a good month before I was finally able to sort of say goodbye to Magic, and
Yes.
get him out of my, because he was still kind of in my spirit a little bit. So.
Yes. Victor, are you still in touch with any of the cast members today? And if so, what has that connection been like over the years?
So I would just say yes. There is there's a brotherhood for all of
Mhm.
us that did the film, whether we were in prison or whether we were outside. So I've spent lots of time in Texas, and especially in San Antonio. And San Antonio is where Jesse Borrego lives. That's Cruz, the artist in the
Mhm.
film, Crucito. That's where he lives. So when I'm in San Antonio, Jesse and I, many times have gone to have lunch or dinner together. We've done a couple of events together ourselves where we sign autographs and whatever. But pre-COVID. Now, remember, after COVID, when we would go audition, a lot of times I would run into the other actors at auditions because sometimes we would be competing against each other. It didn't
Mhm.
matter that, I looked one way and the other guy looked another way. One guy was tall, one guy was, whatever. But, like, because if it was a Latino role, we called ourselves the usual suspects, like sometimes there'd be like 3 or 4 of us from Blood and
Mm.
Blood Out at the auditions. Since COVID, we don't audition in
Yeah.
person anymore. We do it
Mm.
all like we're doing now. I have
Yes.
I have to tape my own auditions at home, or I go to a little studio or whatever. And so we don't have that kind of interaction like we used to. But whenever we do see each other, it's I think a lifelong brotherhood that that we did this film, and we all understand the meaning of it now. We all understand that of all the things that we've done in our careers, most of us would say this is probably, if not the most memorable and the most impactful, because of the reaction that this film has gotten and continues to have. So, and I'll give you, I say there's 3 generations that are fans of this film, but there's a 4th generation, because I've been at events, at my events, and I have a 6, 7, 8-year-old come up to me and like do a couple of my lines, and I'm going, first of all, I'm going, why are your parents showing this to you? It's, sever, but it's because it's, they believe it's part of their, the culture, part of the
Yes.
upbringing or whatever.
Yeah.
But it is that very interesting, that we're going on to, almost a fourth generation. So this film, will, I think this film will kind of have, will live on long after I'm gone. That and that's the beauty of film is
Mm,
that celluloid, that's the old term for film, um, is will last forever. That's why, we watch films as actors. We watch, I mean, one of the first films that I saw that really made me want to be an actor. I was already here, but I went and saw, I'd never seen it. And as when I was younger, but I went and saw it at a movie theater. They were playing A Streetcar Named Desire,
oh yes.
the Marlon Brando film, with Vivian Lee and I mean just all these amazing actors in that film. And I remember that at the end of the movie when the credits started to roll is when I kind of I realized I was in a movie theater. I was so lost in the film that I forgot I was where I was, and
Hmm.
I went, I want to do that. And so I think that's um, I think this film will have it continues to have its impact. And again, to the fan base, the only thing I could say is thank you for for allowing me and the honor to represent, and that it made a difference, and it made a difference in in maybe in your life, in your culture, and that it's a memory that they have, and I have, and I really understand and respect it even more than I did probably when I did it. You know, did we
Yes.
did we know we were making a special film? Yes. Did we know that it would have the impact that it had? No, I don't think any of us did. You know,
Mhm.
especially when the studio only allowed us, we were only in the movie theaters for 7 days, and they pulled it because they were afraid of it. They were afraid that, maybe, something would, there might be a gang incident at the movie theater.
Mm.
And so, it completely, they kind of buried the film. And yet look at the fan base. It's still there. It's even hard to find the film streaming. And yet the fans find somehow, sometimes it's on YouTube.
Yes, it
They'll
is.
find they'll
Mhm.
find a version of it, probably because somebody shot it from their camera at home and put it on YouTube. So it's not because the film itself, if you see the original, it's beautiful. I mean, the cinematographer was he's Mexican from Mexico City. It was his first film that he did in America, Blood and
Mhm.
Blood Out. And this is a small story, and as I'm sure we're getting ready to wind down, but the cinematographer's name is Gabriel Barastain, and so I went right from Blood and Blood Out to The Distinguished Gentleman, to
Mhm.
the Eddie Murphy film, the comedy.
Yes.
Gabriel was the cinematographer on that film too, and
Oh.
that's rare in Hollywood. Usually, you don't work with you probably never work with the same director twice.
Mhm.
I've never worked for Taylor Hackford again. I've only worked with Steven Spielberg once. Like all the famous directors I worked with, Michael Mann, this one now, one time. And so the fact that I worked with the same cinematographer two times in two consecutive films was unique. So it was and just a little fun little part of the sort of the Blood and Blood Out family. I got to work with Gabrielle a second time. So
Yes. Yes. So tell me, Victor, seeing your face tattooed on someone's body is something that very few actors experience. What did that feel like the first time?
okay, so the first time, I mean, it was kind of like like I kind of was, I took a step back and it felt a little like odd or weird or whatever. And then I had to start thinking about it a little bit more. And it's only because I don't, like I came from a generation and at a time where very few people had tattoos. So in today's world, I probably would have tattoos on my body because, that
Yes.
it would just things change. I was,
Mhm.
I'm a former athlete. So I played, college. I played a little professional football with the Miami Dolphins. I was at a couple of their training camps when I was a young man, and so athletes now, as you see, they're they've got lots of tattoos and all that, but culturally that wasn't a thing for me. So I probably didn't understand that, and then it was probably when I saw the second and third one, and I saw the first mural. And then I realized, oh my God, this is like, because my character's not one, I'm not one of the
Mhm.
three lead actors in the film, but I play a significant role in the film. Um, that I went, oh my God, this like they're connecting with this character, and it's I'm really honored, and I've done a lot of other films. Like I did a Star Trek, and I have my character in Star Trek actually has a Star Trek playing card. So I play a guy
Mhm.
named Altovar, and you can't see me. I'm completely in prosthetics, and I got red ruby eyes, and whatever. So I
Uh-huh.
have a playing card, but it doesn't not like Blood and Blood Out. I've done voices for cartoons. I've done, all, whatever, and yet nobody tattoos them, or I don't see artwork. I've seen my character. They not that it's been on The Simpsons. There's the cartoon show The Simpsons, but there are images of me drawn like a Simpsons character.
Mhm.
So, it's I have there's a painting on my wall of when my book first came out in 2005. I did a sort of a national book tour,
Mhm.
and there was a young fan that came to one of my events, and he did an oil painting of of me, as magic, and it's on my wall today, still. And I think that it was a little startling at first, and then I realized, um, for most people, when you put a tattoo on your body, there's a significance. Whether it's and I have zero tattoos. There was a point where when my son was born, and I knew that
Mhm.
we had lots of tattoo artists that worked on the film and whatever. There was a moment where I thought, well, maybe I'll go like, get his initials and his birthday put on my body somewhere or whatever. And then I was like, no, it's okay. I mean, it's like, first of all, I was thinking about putting it like on my hip or someplace where nobody would see it. And I go, well, if
Mhm.
I'm going to put a tattoo on my body, why, you know, I would probably put it somewhere where somebody would see it. Um, but I still have zero tattoos on my body. But
Mm.
again, I understand the culture now so much differently, and also just through time, tattoos. I not only in this country, but I think worldwide it doesn't have the same stigma that it used to have. Like when I was growing up, you were in the military or you had done time in prison. That's
Mhm.
why you had a
Mhm.
tattoo. So now it's art, for a lot, so I've seen some beautiful artwork on people's body, and it's not for me. I mean, I've never, I've thought about getting a tattoo, but then I went, okay, well, it's like I'm as old as I am now, and I don't, but, um, I certainly wouldn't put myself on my body. Like, that would be a little strange, but, for me to do it, but I'm honored to see it, and by the way, it's not just men. I've had a lot of female fans that have shown up at my events with magic tattooed on their body, and I was like, "Wow, okay." 'Cause,
Yes.
sometimes you think it's mainly the men, but no,
No.
women are tattooing and, have amazing artwork on them. I've seen magic on people's heads, and I go, "Okay." So, that's,
Do you
I
think
think it's
they're
like I say,
connecting
yeah.
to the character only or to something within themselves as well?
Well, I think that the character probably represents something,
Mhm. Mhm.
that's also personal to them, but sometimes it's just so as an example, I've seen, like, if somebody's like, and I'll use the example that there's a tattoo that I have a picture of, that is, that on the top part of the arm is Tony Montana from Scarface.
Mhm. Mhm.
The Al Pacino character, and I'm
Yes.
right below him, and I'm right below him. And so, like, so they could be like a gangster thing, like, they like putting gangsters on their bodies or whatever. But I think it could be like culturally, sometimes you can
Mhm.
tell if
Mhm.
somebody's doing something. So I've seen people where they'll have me on their body, but there'll also be something else, maybe something like from the Aztec culture, that's very much a part of, like, if you look at the work on my body, a lot of it is Aztec.
Mhm.
because I create, in my mind that, like I was probably I'm a reincarnation of an Aztec warrior, and so I had like an Aztec princess, and I've got the stair, the one of the pyramid stairs, and
Yes.
so there's things that we wanted to create to capture that, and then the jaguar on my back, the hot, in Spanish
Mhm.
you call it jaragua, the jaragua that's on my back is like almost my spirit animal that
Mhm.
Magic has this he's a big cat, and it was just, also a big part of the Aztec culture. So,
Yes. Victor, what does this film reveal about pain that people don't usually talk about openly?
well, I think that just the pain of um the sort of the behind closed doors pain of families, and
Mm,
what they deal with. There's, the some of the most profound pain in the movie is when, Crucito, who's the artist,
mhm.
who's addicted to, he becomes addicted
Yes.
to opioids
Mhm.
because of a back injury that he gets. It happens in the film where he gets, basically disabled for life because of the gang. And, he has a young brother who idolizes, Crucito, and, he comes in when they've kind of like, done heroin.
Mhm.
They've fallen asleep on the couch, and the little brother injects himself, just out of curiosity, and it kills him. He overdoses,
Yes.
and the pain of that family, and how it never leaves that, and that pain stays with them for the rest of the movie. That you see that family dealing with the loss of their and Crucito, the character, deals with that pain for
Mhm.
the rest of the film. And, so there's all of those different elements of pain that, the pain of somebody making a choice like Damien, and then, or Mikolo, Damien, the actor, but Mikolo, the character,
Mhm.
and he loses his leg, so now he's going to be disabled the rest of his life. He's going to, so part of him missing because of his commitment to that life,
Mhm.
and the pain that it causes everyone else around them. But I just think, and then again, when you go to the prison scenes, um, there is a level of pain and inhumanity that's there all the time, and you can see it, in the actors around us. Like like I say, the real actors are all around us, and I'm not going to point out who they are, but some of the leaders of
Mhm.
those gangs are in the scenes with us. So they were, because they were there also as our, not only as our guides, but also as our protection. So there was,
Yes.
and there were at least two or three times while we were in San Quentin where the Latino people working, the Latino gang members and
Mhm.
convicts working with us would come up to us and say, "There's a lot of tension going on today," or whatever. They said, "If something happens, if something breaks out, get behind us." So there could have been something, and it didn't happen, but we were warned. There's a possibility that it might. So
Yes.
we, but again, I think there's lots of that. Miklo's character, he's biracial.
Mhm.
He's got
Mhm.
a white dad and a Latino mom, and the
Yes.
fact that he doesn't have a good relationship with his father. So there's a lot of that also that occurs and not only in the Latino culture, but also in the African American culture. There are a lot of boys who grow up without fathers,
Mm.
and then that, or a good father. Like in my case, I had a father, but not a good father.
Yes.
And
Yes.
how that impacts your life, having that kind of, so that's why my personal life as a father to my son Eli, that was a very, like I say, I'm really proud of all my roles as an actor, my roles as an activist, my roles as an author, but my most important role in my life has been that of father to my son. So I think that's been a big part of my journey, um, and I think it has helped me and made me not only a better person, but also a better actor. because
Mm.
I have a different sense of responsibility now. I
Yes.
mean, he's a grown man now, so I don't have to do the hands-on every day, but I'll always be his father.
Mhm.
He'll always be my little boy, no matter how old I get and how old he gets.
Exactly.
So I have that connection. So I think I think we all struggle with, pain and things that happen in our lives, and
Mhm.
sometimes even as we get older, there are people that we start. I'm old enough now where I'm starting to lose people. There are people that whether I played football with in college or I grew up
Yes.
with or whatever that are either very sick or have passed on because that it was their time, and
Yes.
um, I think that's a part of life, and I think that's ultimately what this film. This is a slice of life. This is a slice of a culture. This is a slice of the music and the art,
Mhm.
and the reality of choices, and so that's that again. That's why I think you know as as somebody who's lived a long life, but also has been an actor for well over 40 years now, 50, like almost 50 years that I've been an actor. That this is probably the most important film that I've done because of the meaning of it, everything about it. It was a beautiful film. It's a long film, so, it's like you gotta, it's, an epic. And, and, one of the things that I would leave your audience with is when I signed for Blood and Blood Out, I signed for two, it was Blood and Blood Out 1 and 2. There was supposed to be a second film. And
Oh,
so,
really?
yeah, there was 2 films, so people always ask that. You'll see it on like social media. Sometimes you'll see like, Blood and Blood Out 2 or whatever, because there was always supposed to be a second film.
Mm.
But again, the wrong studio had it, so that it didn't get done. And then there's also this big rumor that's out there that there's a 5-hour version of the film. When are they gonna release the 5 hour? It's not that there's a 5-hour version of the film, it's that Taylor, that's, back then when you shot films, you shot a lot of footage. So there is more there's more footage from all the
Mhm.
different scenes, and even if you look at the back, a lot of people have asked this question, so if you look at the back cover of the film, the DVD or the VHS, if you get,
Mhm.
like, that was when it first came out, it was a VHS. So
Yes.
there'll be a picture of Paco, and that's Benjamin Bratt, and he's dancing with this beautiful Latina, and so Paco had a love interest in the film, but
Mm.
ultimately, when it was time to edit the film and whatever, it was left out of the film. So there's more story and more footage, but it's not like they're gonna release a new version of the film.
Any
I
version,
think
yes.
I
Mm.
I think I think that as much as, a lot of time has passed. So in order for us to do a Blood and Blood Out too, you know, there'd have to
No,
be
it's
like
never too late.
one where, yeah, but we'd have to probably bring in our family into the storyline and then
Mhm.
whatever. But, but maybe it was supposed to only be one film because has had this impact, and maybe
Mm.
it would lessen the impact of this film
Maybe.
if
Mm.
we or it wouldn't, or the second film wouldn't be as powerful as the original, because and I think there are very few remakes of films that I've seen. I remember the one of the few remakes that I saw of a film, and I thought it was as strong as the first film. So there was the original film
Mhm.
Alien with, Sigourney Weaver. And
Yes.
then there was the next one was called Aliens. And I thought it was as like powerful, scary. It was such a great sci-fi. But there are very few times where I see like, like how many Fast and Furious can you do? How many of it's just
Yes.
like like how many, like in our world now in Hollywood, the big budgeted films, the films that get the biggest budgets are usually the like the say the Marvel comic films, the
Mhm.
Iron Man
Mhm.
film or this film, and like and so like we have at least 20 25 films from Marvel Comics now, and I'm going, like I'm sure I would love to be in one. Not that I wouldn't want to be in one, but I also go, there's so many other beautiful stories to tell, stories like Blood and Blood Out. And so I
Yes.
hope that this film will inspire young filmmakers to try to make another film, whether it's from the Latino culture or any other culture, that will basically tell a story, a slice of life of a family, of a community, and how all of us are impacted by that. And I think that's why I think we will have that. We have this film, and maybe that's supposed to be the journey that we take. And by the way, the journey for Blood and Blood Out is not over, because it still has this fan base that continues to
Yes.
grow.
Yes.
And so, I've asked there, like, I haven't traveled, I have gone to Mexico, but I haven't traveled internationally with this film. And over the last, week, I've got, there's some possibilities of maybe going to Canada. There's some interest in Germany,
Uh-huh.
and I'm going, okay, I mean, it's amazing. Again, the fan base is everywhere. It's not just in the
Of
Latino
course.
culture,
Of course.
but it's also, 'cause again, we know that there's Latinos everywhere, but it's also the impact that it's had on people. I mean, you saw the film,
Yes.
and
Yes.
so there, there's that. So.
Victor, my last question is, if someone watches Blood In, Blood Out today for the first time, what do you hope they walk away understanding on a deeper level?
I would just say the themes that we just finished discussing is that if they go in and like, if they know nothing about the film, then they might walk away with some of the themes that we talked about
Mhm.
family, about culture, about choices.
Uh-huh.
If somebody told them, oh yeah, it's a great gang film, then they're going to go in expecting that. And then maybe that's all they see at first. And they're not paying attention to all the little nuances that are going on in the film. But I think, again, what I hope that they walk away with is there's the cinematography in the film is beautiful. So if you're looking at it from a film, like just as somebody who likes film, it's got an incredible cinematography. It's really
Mhm.
beautiful shot. The music is it plays such a big part in the film, and a lot of people don't know this, but Bill Conti was the composer of our film. And Bill Conti was not, he's an award-winning
Mhm.
composer and conductor, but he was the guy that conducted all the Academy Award when they did the Oscars for years and years and years. So you'd always see Bill Conti in as the conductor of the Academy Awards. Um, and then you've got a writer who really understood this particular genre, this culture, this storyline.
Mhm.
And I hope that they would walk away, um, uh, and knowing that they've gotten the full film experience, and then hopefully they'll be touched by the storyline. That it is
Yes.
that it is a it's a moving, powerful, um, sometimes traumatic, and sometimes very dramatic, and hopefully uplifting at times. And then at the end of the film, like I say, when you see two of the characters at the very end, and that the film goes out, that that they have something that they've lived through, and they have something that they can be proud of. And I think that we all have our stories, and sometimes parts of our stories are going to be very dark, but when we get on that other side, there's lots to celebrate. And I think there's lots to celebrate in this movie, as there is, that I took a journey in this film. It's also, there's a part of my story is in this film.
Mm.
And so as a person, as not only as an actor, but just as a person, um, there's a lot of relevance for me, because there's parts of this story that I lived in real life, and and I'm on the other side, and it just tells you that you can change your life, you can make different choices, and you can come out on the other end and still live a beautiful, profound, happy, peaceful. I grew up in violence, and I live in a world of peace. I mean, in my world of peace.
Yes.
What's going on the outside, we have to battle as citizens of
Hmm.
the world, not just in this country, but citizens of the world. We have to to stand up and raise our voices and whatever. But but in my life, I've chosen a path of peace, and that's not what I grew up. That's not what I grew into when I was born. I grew into a world of violence,
Mm.
and it was not my choice, but my choice is to live it like this. And I think that's ultimately that's the message that people should get from this film
Yeah.
is that we have choices.
Yes. Yes. Victor, thank you so much for taking us beyond the film and into, the meaning behind it. And I think this was a reminder of why stories matter.
Absolutely. Stories are very powerful. We for years, I mean, thousands and thousands of years, we've used stories, sometimes the oral tradition of storytelling,
Hmm.
or in written. Sometimes our storytelling will be in music, and sometimes our storytelling will be, will be on screen, will be
Hmm.
visual. And so this I believe this is, not only is it a great film, but I think it's a piece of art.
It is.
And
It is.
so again, it was a thrill to speak with you again, and I hope the audience will enjoy this.
I'm sure they will. I'm sure they will. And to all of you out there, as we always say, ego is here. You are here. And that's enough.